Hello, I'm Matthew McIver, Artistic Director of the Iowa Stage Theater Company. In our Iowa Stages Conversation series, we're talking with arts leaders across Iowa about what it is to try and make art in the time of Corona and what are the challenges they're facing in this time that we live in. Today, we're delighted to have David Kilpatrick, who is the Executive Director of the Des Moines Community Playhouse. And you'll hear more about the Playhouse and its central role in the artistic world in Des Moines from David as he talks about this 100-year-old institution and the challenges they're facing, as we all are, making art in the time of Corona. So, David, you were just saying how your weekend was.
Well, let's face it, in our industry, weekends don't exist. I mean, actually, I always thought that was the coolest thing was I can take my Monday off and I don't have to fight the crowds. I don't have to fight, other kinds of business. When I want to go take care of things, I get to enjoy a Monday matinee quite quietly. But this particular weekend, I actually said, I don't need to respond to emails. I don't need to even look at emails. And I showed up on Monday morning and I had 180 emails waiting for me. Oh. And only about 10 of them mattered. The rest, I was like, what does that perspective and percentage tell you? And yourself?
There are those times when the universe kind of, I call it the universe unfortunately rewarding my procrastination, where I'll see something come in and not respond to it right away. And by the time I open up the chain, somebody else has figured out the problem and it's done and I don't even have to do anything. Those are my favorites. Doesn't happen very often, but it's kind of fun.
Well, it is one of those things that sometimes I sometimes said to my staff and even to myself, you don't have to respond to everything. Let's see what happens and see if there's another response or another reaction. And of course, we like our immediate response, don't we? I sent an email. Why hasn't they replied? Well, Sometimes little time goes a long way.
Yeah. So for folks who, in our community, everybody knows the Playhouse, but tell us a little bit about the Playhouse and your time there and how you joined them, just to give us a little context for the Playhouse and your involvement there.
Sure. Well, of course, the Playhouse is in its 101st season. So it's been around 101 years. I myself have been here only 3 of them. So there was a lot going on before I got here. I was just part of a national search. John Byers, the gentleman I replaced, he had been here for 37 years. So it took them a little bit of time to make sure they could find the right executive with some experience and some knowledge and understanding. Of course, the Playhouse is a community theater, which means the bulk of our performers, actually all of our performers and all of our backstage technicians are volunteer. We have a lot of other positions that are filled at very, very minimal fee, minimal stipend, just as a sort of say, hey, we really appreciate what you're doing and we know you're putting in a lot of time for us and we're just grateful. And then we have a very small staff, about 13 full-time staff, and then we have a whole range of part-time because we also have teachers and bartenders and other such individuals that just work when there's a performance. So, it's a playhouse. It's been around for a while, and we do about 10 shows a year. So, is that the summary you're looking for?
Sure. And you have the main stage and also the Kate Goldman Children's Theater.
Correct. Yeah, we have the John Byers Theater, which we used to call the main stage. When John retired, then we renamed it. That seats about 412 people, and we do 6 shows a year in that space. And then we have the Kate Goldman Children's Theater, which does 4 shows a year. Of course, when I say these things, understand this is all pre-COVID-19, because this is that chance where we say, should we be looking at some different experiences for our audiences? Should we be looking at some different kind of theater models to follow? Is there some plays we would like to do that we know we can't fill 412 seats? Or is there children's theater we'd like to do that we know really wants 412 seats? So we're kind of, it's a whole new world out there heading in front of us.
Tell us where you guys were mid-March of this year, when sort of all of this started coming down.
Yeah. The 1st of March, we were all getting a bit nervous. And so we were watching and trying to decide what was happening and follow some leads in some of the other industries and some of the other places. And we were just about ready to open Singin In The Rain. See the picture in the back? And by the way, I digress for just a minute. You know, everybody has those flip scenes on Zoom that allows you to change your backdrop. So that's really cool. And they're free. And I talk about, well, this is my $50,000 backdrop. So
you're going to put it in every darn meeting between now and when it comes back, right?
Absolutely.
That's a lot for a poster. That's
exactly. Yeah. We got to the week of March 13th, of course, and things were really, really getting stressful, and our audiences were really beginning to start. Ticket sales had stopped.
Opening night for Singing was when?
Opening night was March 13th.
Yeah.
Friday night. And it was a huge success. Not sold out or anything like that, but it was a good set of numbers. We were pretty happy. But we'd already seen some writing on the wall, and so there were some people talking about whether they were going to see it or not. And I had said, got to plan on seeing it this weekend because we don't know what's going to happen, but we don't want to take any chances. And I even made some phone calls to see if I could get somebody who could come in and film the show on, so we could have a stream of it on Saturday or Sunday, but my best sources weren't available till the next weekend. So on Saturday night, I went to see a play. I was in Indianola at the Carousel Theater seeing Eurydice, which I really enjoyed their version of it. And then as I'm driving back, I'm listening to the news, and rather than drive home, I drove to the theater and announced to the cast and to the crew that we were closing, at least temporarily, Singing in the Rain. And we did that on Saturday night, the 14th of March. And
you made the decision on the way back from Carousel, from Indianola?
Because that's when the governor had made the decision to close. She wanted all the churches closed and the theaters were going to be closed the next day. But we had already seen the numbers drop off, and so she just closed the churches. I was following her lead, being just a little preemptive, maybe by about 12 hours, but it still was the reality of what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And yourself, were you guys in the middle of a production?
We were 1 week away from opening the Cake. We were loading in the Sunday the 15th. No, I'm sorry. We were loading in the 22nd, so we were a week away from load in. We were 2 weeks,
Gotcha.
a little less than 2 weeks away from opening.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were in conversation about that, and we were. Yeah, I was actually because that week of the 13th, the week of the 16th there, that next week was spring break for Des Moines Public Schools. I was actually out of town. I was we drove on the 13th up to my mom's house in Rochester, New York, and I had conversations I had conversations on that day, the 13th, and on the 14th, and then on the 15th had a conference call with the production team and cast of the Cake and announced that we were postponing. So yeah, it was tough because they were basically there. I mean, they weren't all the way where your singing cast was in terms of already being in front of an audience, but it's a tough conversation to have. So,
well, it's because partly they want to do theater. Let's be fair.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we're here for. We, even if it's only a few people in the audience, we still want to do theater. I mean, that's probably the hardest thing that we're, as this industry, we're having to face, is that we do this. We're not doing it for a little bit of money comes in handy, but we're doing it just because we have such a passion and a drive. And when you can't, then you get challenged.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
And I think everybody understands the decisions that we made, and certainly things moved pretty quickly after that. So Singing in the Rain was scheduled to run for how many weeks?
4 weeks.
4 weeks, and that's
4 weeks. 19 performances, and we got 3 of them out. So we still have 16 to go. And
what did you have lined up after that?
Well, of course, we had started rehearsals for Pippi Longstocking. So that was going to do our children's theater. That's been cast, and we were going to do that in the Kate Goldman Theater. And then, of course, we were already heavily in discussions for Leaving Iowa, the next main stage production. And then, of course, our summer show, Matilda. So, we, of course, had the rest of the season all worked out. We had a very tight schedule, but a fun schedule. And we were just looking to getting forward. until things change for us.
And at what point after you had to suspend performances for Singing in the Rain did you make decisions on the rest of the season?
Well, we've been holding off. I mean, for the longest time, we were just like, I mean, if it had been the imaginary 3 weeks that we were kind of all ever so hopeful about, then we had a plan. It was just going to be slightly compressed.
Remember when 3 weeks seemed like a long time for everything to be closed?
Oh yes, I sure do. And then we had a plan for, okay, May 15th, we'll like, all right, we'll lose a play, but we'll still do it. And then we've made plans for like, okay, Memorial Day, we're going to still do it. And even now, unfortunately, every time I read an article in the newspaper or follow what's going on in the sports world or Broadway, I get more and more less and less optimistic that it's going to be sooner rather than later. And so I'm beginning to suspect and feel that we may be looking at Labor Day as an earliest time. And there's times I read an article that even feels optimistic.
That would mean that you guys would reschedule 3 shows?
Well, yeah, we would actually shift all kinds of things. Singing in the Rain is how we would open our season. So even though we had made a season announcement in February, we're going to change that season out a bit. So Singing in the Rain is going to be the first play we're going to do as soon as the building opens. I mean, the set is there, the lights are there, everything is ready. So we can open that one actually pretty quick, in about, almost about 10 days after we get permission to open the building. And then Matilda was something we had already talked about. We were going to talk about moving and kind of letting that one, taking that one out for a year or so. And then Leaving Iowa, it's a small enough of a play that we might try and shove it in someplace, shoehorn it in. Mm-hmm. And then Pippi Longstocking will probably shift that into the 2021 season and pull one of the plays for children's theater from there. So we've got some shuffling to do. But again, that of course is contingent upon can we get in September.
And David, on a typical day in your building, and the historic building there on 42nd Street in Des Moines, how many people are employed at the Playhouse? How many people are in the building in a given day?
Well, on a typical non-performance day, then we've got 13 full-time employees that are in the building between the box office, our production staff, and our administrative staff. When we have a show that night, then of course, employees from a standpoint, we've got at the box office and the concession stand, the house manager, mm-hmm. And then of course all the performers and band and technicians and that kind of stuff. So it's usually a pretty active building, and there's always some kind of production meeting going on somewhere. And it's getting ready for the next show, because we're always working 3 or 4 shows ahead. We can't just work on one show at a time. So the building can be pretty active, and right now it's just me, one lonely little person sitting here responding.
You're the only person in the entire building right now.
The only person in the entire building. So twice a day I walk around the building. In the morning I get here to make sure everything looks good and nothing's leaking. And at night when I leave, I make sure all the doors are secure. I have this little routine that I do with myself now. So,
and you're at the building pretty much like a normal work week, like an 8 to 5 kind of?
Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, basically. Yeah. Because I'm the only one here, then there's no chance of a risk contagion, making anybody, infected or anything like that.
Sure.
We rent out the building on Sunday mornings to a church, which of course they're not using the building for as a church right now, but bless them, they are still paying their rent. They recognize that's their contribution to the community. Is they can't do a lot, but they can pay their rent. So right now they're doing that for us. And then they show up on Tuesdays and come do a film. They film their sermon on Tuesdays now. And they show up with their gloves. They haven't gone to wearing masks yet, but we, of course, they do wear their gloves. And they practice definite social distancing. I mean, we really fortunately, in a big building that can hold 400 people, it's easy to find space for 2 to stay apart.
Sure.
So. And where are you? Are you working at home now? Because do you have offices?
We have offices. We have a rehearsal space at 111 11th Street that has some offices in
I
it.
lost you.
Can you hear me, David? All right.
Me.
Are you there? Can you hear me,
Something
David?
happened.
Okay. I think I'm still talking. I think I'm still on.
Can you hear me now still?
I can still hear you.
Okay. I was using an earbud. I turned my earbud off. So let's,
Okay.
we'll stay.
Well, I can hear you. The earbud was good sound, but this will work. This will work.
Yeah, the earbud was a very nice sound. So tell me what I can do to make it not so obnoxious.
Oh, I think we're going to roll with what we've got.
Okay.
You know, these are these are challenging times, and I'll clip that bit out. We'll do something. So we do have offices at our rehearsal and production space at 111 11th Street. When we stopped production on The Cake on the 15th of March, we a few days afterwards decided we were going to close those for a couple of weeks out of what we were back then. We kept using the phrase "an excess of caution," right? Turns out not to be an excess. So, and honestly, I don't know that anybody's been in that building since. So I've been working from home, staying with family, and doing all that I can remotely. The thing about us, since we have a rehearsal space and a production facility, but we don't have a performance space of our own. We rent from Des Moines Performing Arts, obviously, and it makes it so that pretty much everything we need to do, I can do virtually anyway. So we live, all of our stuff is shared information between various systems. And so I don't have to worry about, I can just log in from any, I always like the fact that I could do my job from a cafe or from the office or from the Stoner or wherever I needed to be. And it's paid off for us because the transition to virtual working it's no transition for us. We're virtual anyway. There's very little that's local, other than the actual things you need to do theater in terms of rehearse and build and all of those kinds of things. So that transition's been okay for us. We're very fortunate in that sense. Now, you are the only person in the building and practicing, good social distancing and all those great things, which means that your staff are all home, or at least not in the building. At what point did you guys make that decision? I mean, that's a big impact on 13 people.
That was actually, can you hear me okay still?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That actually came about pretty quickly. We shut down Singin In The Rain on the 15th or the 14th. And then basically I gave the staff a week's notice and said, we're going to go to a furlough situation. Mm-hmm. And we basically paid PTO, as much PTO as they wanted to use, whatever was required by law to use, which changed halfway through the process. We got, but they were all very appropriately and legally where they needed to be in terms of what they used for PTO before they went on to unemployment. But as a furloughed employee, then they also are still collecting all of their health benefits. So the Playhouse continues to pay their health benefits. It's just that they're a furloughed situation, so they're not working for the Playhouse. And I send out a weekly notice and communicate with them. And again, we were like, okay, it was easy for 3 weeks. It was tolerable for 6 weeks. I think if we creep into 6 months, it's going to be unbearable for us all.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just to give folks a sense of what kind of some of these impacts are, and not to divulge too much, but roughly on a percentage basis, the kind of the ticket sales that you were looking at for the rest of this year, what percentage of your income comes from those sorts of ticket sales?
Well, I mean, these are public numbers that we talk about with great regularity. So we basically, we have a $2 million budget. Mm-hmm. And 1.3 of it is on sales, either between classes, tickets, or New York trips, and the rest is from donations.
That's about 60%?
So about 60, 65%. Okay. So the challenge is of course, when you don't have a show, and if people have already paid for the show, then you have to start talking refunds or exchanges. And the challenge with exchanges is that future income that you were counting on that you don't have, because let's be fair, and it's no secret in this industry, we don't sit there with big bank accounts, with lots of cash, and somebody has paid us their money, and we wait till that performance before we start spending that money. We've spent that money already. It's how we get our sets and our costumes and our lights and our staff and that kind of stuff. So it's it's not an easy situation. And so one of the processes that's talked about is in this kind of environment, especially in our particular industry, is the idea of what's called hibernation. And that's very common for theaters or common for industries that can't sell anything, can't be open. They have to look at hibernation as one of their options. The other option, of course, being some sort of alternative revenue stream, which we're going to have to come see if we can think about and explore what that's possible. But let's face it, in our industry, it's all based on social gatherings. It's based on groups of people, and whether it's performers or whether it's the audience or both, ideally, and that makes it a particular challenge trying to generate income when that's what you have to have, and that's what you can't have. All the other restrictions in the world of theater and our history over 10,000 years of them trying to get rid of theater was never based on you can't sit side by side. It was always based on something else.
Right. And you've got a long background in theater. You've worked in theaters in a number of different places, a number of years. Before this, what was the biggest challenge you had to face in managing or running a theater? Because I'm gonna go out on a limb and say this is the biggest thing you've dealt with in your career.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is up there.
It's unprecedented for all of us who deal in this industry, for exactly the reasons you just outlined. We've never had a challenge to our industry that was based on the idea that you can't put more than 10 people in a room.
Right.
So before this, what was a I mean, maybe not the biggest, what was a big challenge, or what would you have considered a big challenge before the last few months?
Well, I was in one theatrical situation until we could smooth out cash flow. When I first got there, the transition was pretty challenging from the way their business model that they had used to when I was able to shift it. And I have to say, when you're sitting there on Tuesday and you're opening the play on Thursday, and your bookkeeper comes up to you and says, you have to call the banker or we're not going to make payroll on Thursday. And you got to figure out some more money because we have run out of cash and we have run out of money. I got to tell you, when you're sitting there trying to prioritize, I got a show to run or I got to go pay for it so I can do the show. Obviously I went and talked to the banker and thank goodness I had a good banker, but still, that was one of the more memorable, challenging moments when I had to stop doing what was important to go do something which was really important.
Right.
And so, in that regard, then, I think that's probably one of the areas. I mean, let's face it, in this business, cash flow is a challenge and all aspects of it. And you want the best and most talented people you can get at all times, but you can only afford a certain percentage of them and only afford a certain percentage of their talent even. And so it's that desire to do incredibly great things and never having the budget to do it. But let's think about it. On Broadway, they have the money and they still make mistakes. So, there's a $67 million flop out there about Spider-Man. So, I'm feeling like, okay, we're not dealing at that level quite.
We're not, yeah, we haven't lost that much money.
No. How about yourself? Do you have a challenge that you faced?
I mean, I have a different, you have a much richer executive experience set than I have in terms of managing theaters and things like that. I came to Des Moines in 2008 as part of the group that started the Des Moines Social Club. And
right.
I would say basically the 5 years that I spent there were sort of constantly what you're talking about, and sort of trying to. It was a classic case of stone soup, where we had nothing, and somehow we're trying to start something. And
Right.
actually, it's not true that we had nothing. What we had were some incredibly talented and creative people who were willing to work insane hours and have no resources and make crazy stuff that was interesting enough that it got the concept off the ground. So I would sort of cite that entire time where you never knew from month to month what the next month was going to be, as a real exciting time. And similar to this in that it's going to take, we don't know what next month is, and we're not going to know for a long time. You and I were having a conversation last week, and you were saying that it's not just a question of when we can reopen, it's a question of what audiences feel like when that reopening happens. What sorts of ways are you guys trying, what sorts of conversations are you having with stakeholders or with audience or donors or funders or artists? What sort of conversations are you having right now around what this looks like?
In fairness, right now, the basic strategy that we're kind of taking is since we just don't have enough information, anything we do right now is totally guess.
Sure.
So I'm kind of buying, I'm kind of trying to just say, hey, let's see if we can figure out what the world is doing. I mean, we still don't have enough real clarification of what the coronavirus is coming from, how it's infecting you. I am plotting how to sit there and can I do social distancing in the audience? But every theater I've talked to around the country talks about how there is no way you can function if you lose half your house. You know, you've built your entire operations based on a certain percentage of the house.
Well,
and if you,
just to do your earlier point, if 65% of your income is that earned income piece, and you're talking about cutting that in half, you've just lost 32.5% of your income.
right.
I don't know many businesses that could take that kind of hit and survive.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, that is one of the major fears. I think the other fear that's also an issue is the fact that our audience, when are they going to be feeling confident, even if we're loud? When are they going to be, what's going to take to make them feel safe? Is it wearing masks? Is it watching and seeing everybody else wearing masks, but they don't have to? Is it walking around with gloves, or is it watching everybody clean everything as people walk past it? You know, is it learning that there's HEPA filters in our air conditioning system? What is it that's going to make them feel safe? That, I think, is the great unknown, and we have no industry whatsoever to turn to right now for an example, because nobody's open. And that's actually what's kind of keeping us in this great unknown, is that we just can't even look at anything and extrapolate. All we've got are these scientific models, which so far are proving to be guidance, but not fact.
Sure.
And so that's kind of where I'm stuck. And as a matter of fact, we had a board meeting scheduled for Wednesday, and I basically said, there's no decision that we can make because we have no information to make it with. So they said, yeah, let's wait and see if something fresh comes up in the next couple of weeks that forces a decision to be made by the board. So
wow,
that's kind of what's driving. And then I'm reading everything I can about, like even Las Vegas is talking about a show where they were going to have to take some sort of antiseptic shower before they could do that show. They're trying to come up with the plan to make the audience feel safe to come to the casino and watch the show. I'm just like, yeah. So,
I mean, in these times too, the arts can fend off arguments in all sorts of times about priorities, or we should spend our money on this or that or the other, and it's difficult to argue with priorities in terms of when people are out of work, or when people need food, or when people need healthcare. Obviously, those are things that have to get taken care of. What role do you see for the arts, for theater, as we begin to move into what, assuming that we're getting to the place where we're starting to come back, what do you see the role of the Playhouse or theater companies in us as we begin to open back up, when it's appropriate to do that again? And we don't know when that is, we don't know how that's going to look, but what do you see as the contribution that our kinds of organizations can offer?
Well, backing up just a hair, I will tell you that when I was in Amana, Iowa in 2008, and there were, theaters that had lost costumes and had lost seating, and they were like, we should do a fundraiser to help out. And I says, we're dealing with people who've lost their houses, their clothes, their food. I mean, they have no idea what's going on. I don't think anybody cares to do a fundraiser for a theater yet. Let's take a little bit of time. But what we could offer is an escape. And that was something in 2008. We were trapped in Amana for 3 days, where it was 165 miles to find a bridge to cross a river. I mean, we were that confined to the space.
Give folks who may not be aware of the context a little bit of what was going on in Amana at that time.
2008 was the floods, the major floods. Yeah, that was the floods of 08. And
this would have been June of that
year. Little
year.
Community near Cedar Rapids. And we were pretty isolated. But you know what? We did a show. We had only 25 people show up. I mean, but those 25 people, we invited them down to the first 2 rows, and the cast did a show, and those 25 people so enjoyed their lives for those 2 hours. They got to forget about what was the stress and the strain. And I had the same experience on March 13th with the opening of Singin In The Rain. For those 2 hours of watching the play, I could forget about coronavirus for 2 hours, and just enjoy an escape. And that's where I think the theater, regardless of the size, regardless of the space, I think theater does that, and is going to be desperately needed to do that for the next couple of years. And theaters, we began, as you know, we began with storytellers around the campfire. So there weren't, but 15 Neanderthals hanging around with us, and we got to talk about killing that brontosaurus. But so we're used to small groups. And that's why one of the things that I think is important, we talked about money, and we talked about big deals, and we talked about expenses, and we've talked about, debts and things like that. But I think the reality is we also have to remember what we offer is something special, unique. You cannot get it via Netflix. You cannot get it, in any, I don't care how big those movie screens are, you cannot get the experience that comes with watching somebody tell you a story. And in fairness, although it's neat to see them in lovely, gorgeous costumes and huge, gigantic, movable sets, I think watching a half a dozen people tell you a compelling story, even if they're wearing blue jeans and T-shirts, that's going to allow you to A, escape, and B, connect. I think that's our value. That's what we do as theater, and that's never, ever going to go away. That need and desire for it, which is why things like you and me, our theaters aren't going away. They may not look exactly the same as they did, but they're not going to go away because we've been around here 10,000 years. We're not going to let it something simple as this, and it's not as simple as this, as complex as this, as something as damaging and challenging as this, still keep us away from trying and doing stories and escape and laughter and a little tear here and there, and just take us outside of ourselves. And that's what we do best.
David, I think that's wonderful, and I think that's a great place to leave the conversation, and on such a great note. Thank you. I appreciate you and the work and everything that the Playhouse brings. You've got an incredible staff, and I can't wait until they can be back in the building with you and making more great theater. Like I said, I was out of town the weekend of the 13th and had been making plans to see Aaron Horst's production of Singin In The Rain with Charlie Reese and all those folks when I got back. So I look forward to seeing that when it's the first show back on your stage.
Absolutely. We promise it.
All right. Thanks very much. I appreciate your time.